morning. Today we're going to go to a place different than I normally do. We're going to fly this time. We're going to go to Cripple Creek, Colorado, fly into Colorado Springs. My wife and I are going to meet up with my brother and sister-in-law, and we're going to go take a trip up there to Cripple Creek and do a video. I still have my travel coffee though, because I got to make it to the airport. Come along with us and let's go explore Cripple Creek. Well, we just arrived here in Cripple Creek, Colorado, a town that was founded in the 1890s. Prior to that, it was known more for ranching. It's quite a wealthy gold town for sure, and it's still actively mining today through open pit process. There's about 1,100 permanent residents here, full-time residences here. It's got a lot of old shops. It's got casinos still today. So let's go walk around town and see what we can find, and let's look at the history. The first settlers of this area began using these mountain parklands as open range for grazing cattle in the 1870s, long before gold was discovered in Cripple Creek. In fact, it was ranchers cursing the rocky streams for causing injury to their cattle who gave Cripple Creek its name. Descendants of these first ranchers still operate in the area today. Ranching on the lands has proven prosperous. Over 1 million pounds of beef are produced each year from cattle raised in this area. Before the gold boom, and in its earliest years, Cripple Creek was the site of a humble cattle ranch. In 1871, the Weltys, a family that operated a ranch in Colorado Springs, began looking for property further from the booming city. They settled on a patch of land close to the Mount Pisgah, a rounded cone of mountain nearby. The ranch called the Broken Box changed hands in 1876 when the Womack family obtained the Weltys' squatters' rights to the land for $500 and 2 pigs. The Womacks got 160 acres along with a log house, spring house, and a corral. Bob Womack was the eldest child of Sam and Corella Womack, who were among the first homesteaders in Cripple Creek. Womack was in his 20s when his family moved to the grassy slopes of the mountain, and he worked as a ranch hand and cowboy. The story of Cripple Creek is a story of riches made and lost. It's the story of a cowboy and rancher that searched for gold in the area for 20 years without any success. It's a story of a carpenter who made his living down in Colorado Springs during the winter months and searched for gold during the summer months. He looked for 17 years without any success. The rancher-cowboy, Bob Womack, and the carpenter, Winfield Scott Stratton, worked independent of each other until one day they teamed up. It was out of the friendship that Stratton had with Bob Womack that he agreed to take a ride to Cripple Creek in May of 1891. Bob Womack was certain there was gold in this immediate area. But Womack still couldn't convince people of his discovery. He had been talking about his search for gold for so long that a few people paid attention to him. Finally, the following spring, he convinced a local man with some knowledge of geology, Ed De Laverne, to form a partnership. Their business arrangement marked the beginning of the Cripple Creek mining district. With that claim and the formation of the district, the last gold rush in Colorado started, and Cripple Creek became one of the most significant gold districts in the entire United States. Womack's find and discovery of gold never netted him more than a few $100s from the original claim. He made many people millionaires. Bob Womack never profited from it. He squandered his profits on alcohol, sold his claim for a pittance, and died a poor man in 1909. Winfield Scott Stratton left Indiana in 1869 at the age of 20, and 2 years later he arrived in Colorado Springs. He began working as a carpenter and in just a year owned his own business. But Stratton hadn't traveled west to be a carpenter. For years he had been intrigued by stories of vast riches to be found in Colorado. In 1874, he made his first mining investment, pouring $3,000 into a silver mine in the San Juan Mountains in southwest Colorado. The mine was worthless, but Stratton got hooked. He sold a successful carpentry business for $1,000 and became a miner. For the next 20 years, his life revolved around mining. On July 4, 1891, Stratton staked a claim and he called it the Independent. Less than 10 years later, Stratton sold the Independent for $10 million. That equates to $370 million today. Winford Stratton became one of the wealthiest persons in all of the U.S. Yet he found no happiness in his wealth. Until the early 1890s, Colorado silver mines were the source of most of the state's wealth. The mines that dotted the state produced nearly 60% of the nation's silver. But in 1893, everything changed. A law called the Sherman Silver Purchase Act was repealed. The Sherman Act had required the U.S. Treasury to buy 4.5 million ounces of silver every month, an amount that kept silver mine owners rich. After the law was abolished, the country silver standard was replaced with the gold standard. Overnight, the silver mining industry shut down. In one 4-day period, silver prices dropped from 83 cents to 62 cents an ounce. Businesses closed their doors, and miners from Leadville and other silver camps were out of a job. Many moved on to the gold camps of Cripple Creek. This was a boon for the gold mining industry, for the miners who arrived were experienced. The repeal of the Silver Act was one of the contributing factors to the Depression of 1893, considered the worst economic crisis to hit the country since its founding. When news got out that Cripple Creek was home to vast deposits of gold, the world sat up, listened, and hit the road. Fewer than 500 people lived in the gold camp in 1891 at the start of the gold rush. By the end of 1892, the population had grown to 2,500. The following year, 10,000 more people moved up to the mountain. By 1894, Cripple Creek was one of the largest towns in Colorado. In 1900, the Cripple Creek Times, the town's first newspaper, reported the gold camp population at 55,000. The lure of the western frontier, the promise of fortune, stable work, and a better way of life attracted thousands. Miners came from all over the world in search of gold on the Pikes Peak area. Some of them had experience in mining, some in running businesses, and others with no experience at all. To succeed, they all had to work hard. Mining took dedication. For the miners, the work underground was tough. For managers, the demands to make a profit were stiff. And for an owner, the competition was fierce. They all faced other obstacles as well. The weather conditions at an altitude of 9,500 feet took their toll. Tuberculosis and other illnesses were on the rise in the United States. Supplies were slow to arrive, but determination and cooperation of mine owners and workers and hundreds who supported them helped the region earn the title of the world's greatest gold camp. The Cripple Creek Gold Mining District formed on April 5, 1891. In 71 years of operation, the district produced more than 21 million ounces of gold. That's worth about $16.5 billion today. Known to many as the world's greatest gold camp, Cripple Creek eclipsed all other districts in the United States. At its peak around 1900, nearly 500 mines tapped the gold ore, and over a dozen thriving communities dotted the hillsides. The monumental wealth that began pouring out of the mines in the world's greatest gold camp in the late 1890s was staggering. On a national level, no other mining region could compare to the monthly financial rewards the Pikes Peak region provided. Owners were becoming millionaires, investors were experiencing remarkable returns, and miners had ample money in their pockets. Commerce in the region flourished, and it was not all generated by mines themselves. Hundreds of support businesses set up shop in the clear mountain air. In late 1891, Charles Tutt, a young entrepreneur from Philadelphia, entered the gold mining business in Cripple Creek. When he realized he needed a partner, Tutt called on his friend Spencer Penrose. Penrose was a charismatic man whose energy balanced well with Tutt's patience and persistence. Penrose joined Tutt in the mine he had purchased a year earlier, the COD or cash on delivery mine. It wasn't one of the biggest mines, but Penrose and Tutt made money on it, buying it for $2,000 and reselling it in a short time later for $250,000. With their profits, they started several other ventures in mine processing and real estate, including investing in homes and businesses in Colorado Springs and Cripple Creek. In 1895, they invested in a reduction mill and later in railroads. Penrose went on to become one of the most influential men in Colorado Springs, building the Pikes Peak Highway, the Broadmoor Hotel, Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, and various sugar companies. He died in 1939. Another example of rich and prosperity was two men by the name of Horace Bennett and the other Julius Myers. Horace Bennett paid $25,000 for a parcel of land owned by the Womacs. Horace Bennett set out to make his money in real estate. With his partner, Julius Myers, Bennett laid out his town on a hill so it wouldn't interfere with the flatter land that he thought was good for just one thing, and that was cattle ranching. Because the town of Cripple Creek was laid out on a slope, the main street was built on two levels that remain there today. The oddly configured street is named after Bennett. The pair mapped out their land into 760 lots that covered 30 blocks and set out to sell it, charging $25 for inside lots and $50 for corner lots. A building boom started with timber taken without permission from nearby government land. A primitive wood home heated with kerosene could be built for $500. Businesses began cropping up all over as well, bringing the price increase with them. Those lots that went for $25 and $50 in 1901 sold for $3,000 and $5,000 just 2 years later. Two brothers, A.E. and L.G. Carleton, arrived in Cripple Creek in 1893 and proceeded to build one of the greatest empires of the gold camp. The brothers started out small, selling fuel and firewood to residents. They quickly realized that transportation was needed in the camp, so they set up a lucrative ore hauling business. When the businesses became successful, Carleton sold it to the Midland Terminal Railroad and later purchased that railroad. This tycoon owned a bank as well, so he had deep ties to all aspects of the gold camp as a banker and mine owner, including the very successful and rich Crescent Mine. Cripple Creek and Victor became thriving cities with 34 churches and a school system with a reputation for excellence. The Cripple Creek Times reported in 1903, "It may surprise the people of the plains to know that this mining camp spends more money on the education of her youth than any community in the land of like size." Education didn't stop at the 12th grade. Night classes were popular among the adults in town. Residents led busy lives. When they weren't working, they filled halls for lodge and club meetings and crowded 3 opera houses that offered a variety of entertainment, from classical music to opera to vaudeville. Sporting events were big, with horse racing in nearby Gillette and baseball tournaments that drew crowds of thousands. When settlers first came to this region, the main means of transportation occurred by stagecoach or horseback. To get to the high mountain country of the Ute Pass region, many would rig their wagons of horse and oxen and head up the steep trails through the mountainous terrain. But then, once gold and silver started to get found in the mountains of Colorado and other states in the West, it became clear that a better way to remove heavy minerals from the mines for processing was needed. Every time a town sprang up that focused on mining, such as Cripple Creek, it became crucial to develop a solid way to transport heavy building materials to the mines. Plus, transporting the minerals back from the towns became equally as important. After gold was discovered in the area surrounding Cripple Creek and Victor in 1890, a rush to build the first rail lines to the mining district ensued. The Cripple Creek and Florence Railroad won the race and was the first to reach Victor from Florence. The first train reached Cripple Creek on July 1 of 1894. The next day, on July 2nd, the first paying passengers loaded the train on its return route to Florence. Its passenger cars were filled to the brim. Unfortunately, this trip was headed for disaster. The train never traveled over 3 miles an hour when it approached one of the 50-foot trestles. The rear car derailed and pulled down 2 other passenger cars. The locomotive stayed on the track. 1 person was killed and many were injured. The railroad was first put to work transferring ore from mining district to mills in Florence and Pueblo. The railroad was 3-foot narrow gauge, making it tough to compete with the other railroads that would soon make their way to the mining district. In the early 1900s, once mining activity started to slow down, the railroad experienced serious financial trouble. The railroad eventually went out of business in 1915. As Cripple Creek started to boom in the early 1890s, one group of businessmen thought the best route to the mining district could be developed by building rail lines off of the Colorado Midland, which traveled from Divide to Cripple Creek. The railway opened up just after the Florence and Cripple Creek and became the first to make it to the high country. But being a standard gauge line, it proved itself much more useful for hauling freight. The Midland Terminal remained running into the 20th century after all the other railroad companies in the area ceased operations. Mining activity kept the lines running from Colorado Springs to Cripple Creek until the late 1940s. After both the Cripple Creek and Florence Railroad and the Midland Terminal Railroad had been operating, some wanted a more direct route from Colorado Springs to the Cripple Creek mining district. The company started by building a route between Victor and Cripple Creek in 1897, and then a route from Victor to Colorado Springs on Pikes Peak's southern slope. The rail project had a finished completion date of 1901. This railroad was known as the Colorado Springs and Cripple Creek District Railway. On April 13, 1897, the Cripple Creek District Railroad Company was organized, and it operated a 6.25-mile standard gauge railway with an overhead line between Cripple Creek and Victor, Colorado. The 2 railroads, competitive at first, joined forces, forming a monopoly. Mine owners with mills in Colorado City, adjacent to Colorado Springs, organized and built the Colorado Springs and Cripple Creek Railroad, or Short Line, traversing the south slope of Pikes Peak. The new railroad was able to force freight rates downward, accelerating production. By 1917, most rail traffic in the area was directed to the Midland Terminal Railway. The loss of the Bear Creek Bridge in May of 1918 cut off all direct traffic from Colorado Springs. Bankruptcy was declared in 1919, at which time it went into receivership. All operations ceased in 1920 and the line was sold for scrap. Today, travelers can visit the old railroad route by driving on Gold Camp Road west of Colorado Springs. When we were driving down Gold Camp Road, we turned the corner and we saw the Cathedral Rocks, which are just absolutely beautiful. And then I remember during my research, I saw a photo of a train trestle at this location, dated in 1902. Thought I would give you guys a comparison just to see what it's like. By 1920, when Colorado Springs and Cripple Creek District Railroad stopped running, more than half of the district's mines had closed. Mining experienced a brief revival in the mid-1930s when lower labor costs and higher gold prices made it profitable again. In 1935, production hit 3.5 million, but the federal government suspended all gold mining during World War II, and many Cripple Creek mines never reopened. After the war, many houses were abandoned or turned into summer homes as people moved away. The Midland Terminal Railroad stopped running in 1949, and by 1950, the Cripple Creek district populations dropped below 2,000. Nearly all of the district's towns and camps were abandoned, leaving only Cripple Creek, Victor, and Goldfield remaining. But large-scale gold mining was not completely dead in Cripple Creek. The district experienced a short-lived revival in the 1950s after the Carlton Mill opened near Victor. More substantial production returned to the area in the mid-1970s when the U.S. government allowed the price of gold to go above $35 per ounce, and the Cripple Creek and Victor Mining Company started working the old Crescent Mine. By 1990, the Cripple Creek district had yielded a total of more than 23 million ounces of gold. A century after prospectors flocked to Cripple Creek, a new gold rush was about to begin. In 1989, repairs to a tunnel on the main route into Cripple Creek caused a huge drop in tourism. Locals began to consider new ways to develop area's economy. Inspired by the example of the infamous Old West town of Deadwood, South Dakota, where gambling was legalized in 1989 to generate revenue for preservation, Cripple Creek joined Central City and Blackhawk to push for an amendment to the state constitution that would allow limited stakes gaming. 25 years later, gambling proved to be a mixed blessing. Advocates pointed out the casinos had saved Cripple Creek by attracting visitors and generating money for local improvements and statewide historic preservation. But opponents noted that gambling, like mining before, had crowded out other businesses and fundamentally changed the town it was meant to preserve. In 1998, development threats led to nonprofit Colorado Preservation, Inc. to name Cripple Creek among the most endangered historic places in the state. Since then, strong preservation and design guidelines have helped maintain much of the town's historic look and feel. But in 2008, a large modern casino opened at the edge of town. In recent years, Cripple Creek's 12 casinos have generated about $10 million in taxes annually, or roughly 9% of the statewide total. Gambling money has allowed for the restoration or renovation of many important historical buildings in town. Meanwhile, Cripple Creek remains one of the few boom towns in Colorado where mining still has a hold. In 1994, the Cripple Creek and Victor gold mine started large-scale pit operations, and by the 2000s it was producing hundreds of thousands of ounces of gold and silver per year. The massive mine, which employs more than 500 workers, was expanded in the mid-2010s and acquired by mining giant Newmont. In 2014, it produced roughly 211,000 ounces of gold and 110,000 ounces of silver. Gold from the mine was used to re-gild the state capitol dome when it was restored in early 2010. About an hour west of Colorado Springs lies Cripple Creek. a historic mining town that perfectly captures the spirit of the western frontier that shaped the state of Colorado. In its early years, Cripple Creek was known for its gold, with over 500 mines churning out more than 22 million ounces of gold over 2 decades. Today, you'll find treasure of a different sort: rich history, year-round events, and fun family attractions. It's also a place to visit for those looking to strike it rich in its many casinos. And with these next videos, I'm trying to show and get a feel for what it's like to drive along the scenic downtown.